Okay, it looks like it's time to get started. Thank you everyone for joining our live lecture this morning. My name is Isaac and I'll be the lead instructor for today's workshop. And the topic for today's workshop will be how to create your own recipe book app. So a couple things to mention before we get started today. The first one being is we're not going to be taking any questions during the lecture. We want to make sure we get through the application build first. So that being said, at the end of the lecture, we are going to be opening up the floor for a couple minutes so you can ask your questions if you have them. Another thing to mention is that we are recording this workshop. So if for some reason we're going a little too fast or maybe, you just didn't quite catch something and need to see it again, you can always watch at a later date the pace that's better for you. Okay. So diving right in, recipe book app. We've all seen these online before, okay? So let's go ahead and take a look at one. So typically they consist of an input, and you just put an ingredient and it'll pull up a bunch of recipes. Okay, so I typed in beef, it's pulling up a bunch of beef recipes. Okay, and so this is in a gist of what we're gonna be building today is a recipe book application like this. So to get started, we need to navigate to the recipe book starter kit URL. You can find that here. And then we can go and we can copy that URL to our clipboard. We can clone it to our desktop. Let's go ahead and do that. Change directories onto desktop, and then we'll say git clone, and we'll run the command and paste in the URL. Okay, so now that that's been installed, let's go ahead and change directories into the recipe book starter kit. Let's open it up inside our text editor here. Okay, so as you can see, we have our recipe book starter kit pulled up. Okay, and if yours isn't pulled up, you can just go to open here, find it on your machine, and then, select to manually open it. It should appear here in your file tree. Let's just go take a moment to walk through this project and talk about what's going on in the starter kit. So first we have a file called recipes.json. And I've just populated this with some simple recipes which have some images, some instructions, and categories, right? And so these are recipes we're going to be using to display to the end user based on what they search. Okay, and then as well, we have an index.html. This is where we're going to be putting our user interface, where they will have an input and a button to perform their search. And as you can see, I've already included the jQuery CDN, which is going to load in jQuery library for us, and then that's going to be available within our app.js script here. This is where we're going to be writing all of our custom code. Okay, so to get started, let's go ahead and let's set up the input, the button, the messaging for a user interface. Okay, so you can say vol, and I'm going to launch this in my browser using HTTP server. And if you don't have HTTP server, you can install it real easy by going npm install -g http-server. And once you install it, it'll be global on your machine, so you don't have to do that again. And then from here, we can just run the command http-server from our root directory. It's going to serve it on local port 8080. So let's go ahead and navigate to local port 8080. Okay, and there we go. So we can see we just have a blank canvas at this time, right? Okay. So from here, let's go ahead and let's populate our user interface. Okay, so we'll just do recipe book for the title here. Okay, then let's go ahead and let's put in the categories which they can search. Okay, so we'll say categories available. Okay, and then from here, we can just put an unordered list of all of our different categories. Okay, so if we look inside our recipes.json, we got, I think, around 3 or 4 categories, right? We got chicken, beef, fish, and pork. Okay, so let's just go ahead and put those in. And so we'll say chicken is one option they can search. Another one is beef. Another one is fish. And the last one is pork. Okay, so let's go ahead and save that and see what it looks like in our browser. Okay, so now all we need is an input that they can enter one of these categories, and then it will display all the recipes for that given category. Okay, so that being said, let's go ahead and let's add an input here. We'll type our text, we'll do placeholder with the ingredient. Okay, and then we will do an ID so we can later grab the value from our input. And I'll just call this my recipe type. Okay, and then right next to that, I'll put a button. And this button will just be labeled search. And let's add an ID to this button. And that way we can target the button and add event listener. So every time it's clicked, we can run a callback function. Okay, so I'm just going to call this button. Okay, and now let's go ahead and save that. Refresh. Okay, now we have a way to input an ingredient. Okay, so last thing we need in our user interface is we need an output element, okay? Because we're going to be displaying a picture and the ingredient, right, and instructions. So to do this, I'm going to use a div, okay? I'm just going to leave the inner HTML empty. I'm going to assign it an ID, and we'll call this ID output. Okay. So from here, let's go ahead and save all. And let's refresh our browser. And as we can see, we don't actually see output displayed, right? And that's good. We don't want to display anything until after they click search here and are looking up an ingredient. Alrighty. So the next step here is within our script, we need to perform an Ajax request for these recipes. And that way we can use them inside our script and dynamically populate the output with this recipe information. Okay, so because we're working with jQuery, the first thing we want to do is we want to use the ready function to make sure our document's loaded in and ready before we execute any jQuery. Okay, so to do this, let's go ahead and let's set up our document.ready. Okay, so we'll say bling document. Use the ready function here. Okay, so once our document's loaded in, let's go ahead and console log doc ready. Okay, so we save all and we refresh, and we can see it just takes a split second, and then it console logs and lets us know that the document's now ready to execute our jQuery code. So that being said, the first thing I want to do is I want to target each of these elements with an ID and assign it to a variable. Okay, so that's my input, my button, and my output. Okay, so let's just start with my input here. So I'm going to go ahead when the document loads in, I'll say let, and then I'll say recipe type equals hashtag recipe type. Okay, let's do the button, which will target hashtag button. Okay, and last, we want to target the output, right? So we'll say let output equals, and we'll target that by its ID. Okay, so now each one of these variables represents each one of these element nodes, right? Okay, so now we can add an event listener to the button to when it's clicked to take the value of our input, right, and compare it to the recipes, and then gather the recipes that match and display those matching recipes. So to do this, let's go ahead and let's set up an empty recipes array. And that way we can populate this array with all the recipes that match the query. Okay, so we'll say recipes equals empty array. All righty. Next, let's go ahead and let's add our callback event. I should say our event listener on our button. Okay, so we'll say button and we'll listen in for the click event. When the click event happens, we are going to start off by requesting the data from recipes.json. How we're going to do this is we're going to say bling.getJSON, and then we're going to pass in our URL, which in this case is recipes.json. Okay, and then it's going to run a callback function, at which time it should return the data for us. So let's go ahead and let's console log the data that is returned. Okay, so let's save all. And let's refresh, and let's click the button. Okay, and we can see it returns an array with 5 objects. Okay, and each one of these objects represents a different recipe. So now we're successfully, requesting the information, from our recipes.json. We can now loop through that and compare it to the query entered in the input field, and then only populate, the end view with recipes that match. Okay, so to do this, let's run a for loop. We'll say for let I equals 0, I is less than data.length, and I will increment one each loop. Okay, so what we want to do here is we want to compare the recipe type, the value of that, to the category of each of these to see if it matches any of these categories. So to do that, I'm going to throw an if statement. I'm going to say if recipe type dot val equals data at the index of I dot category, then we know that that's a match. So if it's a match, what we want to do is we want to take just that object from the array, we want to push it into our new recipes array here. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say recipes dot push data at the index of I. Okay, and then if for some reason, it doesn't match the category, we just want to continue to the next iteration of the loop to check for more that might match. And then at the end of this for loop, we're going to have the new array. Okay, so let's go ahead and test that out. We'll say console log recipes. Okay, so now when we click the button, what should happen is it should make an Ajax request for our JSON recipes, should return those recipes. We'll loop through that array and compare each of those categories to the value in the input field. And for each one that matches, we'll add it to our new array recipes here. And then we're just console logging that end result after the loop is done. So we will save all, and we go back to our browser, and let's just enter the ingredient chicken. Okay, so it looks like we got an empty array. Let's save all. Let's try that again. Chicken. Okay, there we go. Okay, so as we can see, it has taken my query, and then it looped through that array in our recipes.json, and it only found one recipe that matched chicken. And so it populated our recipes array with that chicken recipe, and that's what we see here. Okay, let's try that again, except maybe we'll try beef this time. Okay, so we go beef. We can see now we get 2 recipes, beef enchiladas and cheeseburger, right? So now we can see it's actually only returning the recipes that match the category of the ingredient we're passing in the field here. So now we know we're getting the correct data within our recipes array here. Now we need to loop through this, and we need to render it for the end user to see. So to do this, let's perform another for loop. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, erase my console log. I'll say for let I equal 0, and then I is going to be less than recipes dot length. And I will increase for each loop. Okay, so now for each element in that, or each recipe in the array, we want to render it. Okay, and so what we're going to do is we're going to target our output, and we're going to append some HTML within that div. So I'm going to say output dot append. Okay, and then I just need to pass in a combination of strings and elements. Okay, also known as concatenation. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to start with just the paragraph for the name of the recipe. Okay, so I'm going to say paragraph, and then I'll say the name of the recipe, and then for the name here, I'll go ahead and concatenate the value, which is going to be recipes at the index of I, dot, and as we can see here, we called it name. So we're going to say dot name. So it should display the name. Okay, and now let's go ahead and let's add the category for the recipe and the image. Okay, so I'm just going to say plus, go ahead and come down here, and then I will put a new paragraph. Okay, and for this one, we will say category. Then we'll concatenate, just like we did the name. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to pass in recipes at the index of I dot category. Okay, and then from here, let's go ahead and add on the image. So for the image, we need to do, instead of a paragraph, we'll do an image element here. And then for the source, we will make it equal to the following. Okay, so we are going to say recipes at the index of I. Then we can see in our recipes, we named it image here. Okay, and then last, we just need to add the instructions. And so we'll say the source will be recipes dot image. Okay, and then we need to add dimensions for this image. So I'm just going to say the height will be equal to 100, and the width equal to 100. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's add in the last thing, which is the instructions, how to make the recipe. Okay, so go ahead and say instructions. As you can see, I'm just kind of following that same process as before. Okay, I'll say recipes at the index of I. Okay, dot, and then we need the instructions. Okay, so we'll say instructions. Okay, so now every time that we click on the button, it will run a for loop through the recipes it's requested from this file, and then it'll push the recipes that match into this new array. We'll loop through that array down here, and we'll, for each one, for each recipe in the array, we will, display that here in the output element. Okay, so let's test it out. We can save all, and we can refresh, and let's type in chicken search. All right, now as we can see, we have the name, category, the instructions URLs right here. and then the actual, image itself. So let's go ahead and try something else. Let's try beef. Search. Okay, as you can see, this time we get 2 recipes, right? Because beef has 2. Chicken only has 1. And in just a few lines of jQuery, we can, as you see, make a simple little recipe book and have recipes rendered for the end user based on the input of ingredient. So let's go ahead and let's open up the floor for a few minutes, and let's see if anyone has any questions on what we've been over. Okay, so your mics are unmuted. If you have any questions, feel free to ask those now. Okay, I don't hear anyone. Going once, going twice. All right, we're out of here. Thanks everyone for stopping by. Have a great rest of your day, and happy coding out there.